So there is a little bit of Ricardian in here, right? So people, a little bit of private savings counteracting the budget deficit, because these people who get half of the transfer, right? These people who are the young agents in period 3, they know that they get this transfer, but they will have to repay something. So they increase their savings. So this is exactly, so the current account balance is smaller than 3. So you see that the current account doesn't go down quite as much as the budget balance, because part of that transfer is used for savings. And in period 4, the old generation who received the transfer in period 3 is running down its assets, so the current account balance is smaller than 0, but the budget balance is positive because now the government is raising, taxes. Here the government is just handing out a transfer. Here the government is raising taxes. Now in the 4th period, the generation that has saved in period 3 is liquidating the savings, has negative savings. The key thing is now, here you have no budget deficit, but a current account deficit. Here you have a budget surplus, but a budget deficit as well. No, here you have a budget surplus, but a current account deficit. But here you have a budget deficit and a current account deficit, and they are both very big. Now, when you try to figure out what you expect to see in the data, you expect to see a relationship between budget balances and the current account balance, but not a one-to-one relationship. First, because the current account doesn't go down as much as the budget balance. And second, because we have these 2 periods in which the current account does something different. So, to make a long story short, you should expect some relationship once you go away from the Ricardian model with the infinite time horizon. You should expect some relationship between the budget balance and the current account balance. Not a one-to-one relationship, but one that is visible in the data. And the question is, of course, eventually an empirical one. So coming back to this thing, right? If we do not completely believe in Ricardian equivalence, then we might expect that this very naive relationship with the budget deficit going up and the current account balance going down might still be somehow visible in the data, because this doesn't fully compensate, private saving doesn't fully compensate for the budget deficit. And again, the logic is here, we don't have Ricardian consumers. We don't have people who have an infinite horizon taking everything that's going to happen in the future into account. Here, these people who get the transfer in period 3, they consume it, end of story. That's half of the population. The other half of the population saves part of it. This is why the current account deficit is not as large as the budget deficit. Again, this is where overlapping generations models are more realistic than infinite horizon models. So this is the interpretation. So why does Ricardian equivalence break down? Well, due to the finite time horizon, agents do not internalize the government's budget constraint. That's the point. People do not, they know that the money that they're given today will be taken away from someone in the future, but it's not them, right? So they consume it, right? So the current budget deficit is financed by future generations' taxes about which the current generation doesn't care. Sounds very harsh, but that's the way it is. With dynastic preferences, the generation that receives transfers would raise its savings to compensate future generations for higher tax payments. So this is the thing that we have on the right-hand side, right? If we have an infinite time horizon, or actually, this is the point, right? So the transfer in period T does not induce agents to consume more in period T. They consume the same amount and they save the excess income that they get due to the transfer. That's the big difference. And as I said, ultimately it's an empirical issue. How Ricardian are people? And by the way, of course, there's many reasons why Ricardian equivalence may break down. Might be people having finite time horizons, people not understanding the relationship, right? We assume that people are very rational. Maybe they don't understand it. And maybe people do not have access to financial markets as much as we think, because here we assume that financial markets are working perfectly. So we could extend this. We could introduce productive government expenditure, distortionary taxation, drop the small open economy assumption. This is all applied in budget deficit in large economies. What are the effects on world interest rates and investment? The welfare implications of budget deficits. Is it fair that one generation gets all the transfers? What does it mean for future generations? And what are the short-run versus long-run effects of expansionary fiscal policy? Right? But the essence is the question, how Ricardian are people? Good. So let's go into the third part of this morning. The first part being kind of the OLG model and the demographic change. The second thing was the OLG model and the effects of fiscal policy. And the third part now is bringing things together in something that the International Monetary Fund does on a regular basis, namely publish the so-called External Stability Report. Now the external sector report. Now the external sector report is an annual publication by the IMF, where the IMF says, monitors evolutions on international financial markets, and also makes statements about whether countries' current account surpluses or deficits are just what we would expect, or too high, or too low. And that's important. And you will see that a lot of the stuff that we did in theory will now have a practical application. That's also. So first of all, you see that going back into the 2000s, there's a period of global imbalances, right? So the blue side is current account surpluses widened in some countries, and in other countries, current account deficits widened. Now, a current account surplus or a deficit is not a problem as such. In fact, you could argue it is a signal of efficient intertemporal trade, right? There are some countries having money to spare, other countries needing money. So some countries having excess savings, other countries needing the money for investment. The funny thing, however, it was that we saw some very rich countries running current account deficits and some rather poor countries running current account surpluses, and that's not what we would have expected. So you see that China, for example, was running a huge current account surplus. Germany was running a huge current account surplus, whereas a country like the United States or the UK were running big current account deficits. Now, after the global financial crisis, current account balances have not gone to zero. They have become a little bit smaller. So the global current account balance, or the overall balance, is just the cross-country sum of absolute values of current accounts relative to global GDP. And you see it used to be something like close to 6%. Now it's close to 2.5%. Okay. Now, the question is how to distinguish excess imbalances from efficient intertemporal trade. So Vietnam running a current account surplus of 2%, is that just right? Or is it too high? Germany running a current account surplus of 7%, is that okay? Switzerland running a current account surplus of 9%, is that okay? United States running a current account deficit of 3%, is that okay? Or should we be concerned about that? And so this is a question that's not easy to answer. So the solution is the IMF's so-called external balance assessment methodology. So they've developed a methodology to answer this question on, a sound basis. What is the EBA approach? Well, first thing is a very simple regression where they estimate the empirical determinants of current account balances. You will be surprised by how simple that thing is, and actually we'll do it tomorrow in the afternoon. We'll go into the EBA, in fact. Now, they regress countries' current account balances for a large number of countries and a lot of years on cyclical and structural or fundamental determinants of savings and investment, and on policy-related determinants of the current account balance. Good. Now, what are the things that they have in the regression? Well, the initial NIIP, relative GDP per capita, GDP growth expectations, demographic structure and evolution, public health spending, fiscal policy, and budget balances. They put this all into the regression, like you put stuff into a soup, right? Now they do it having a reason for it. And I will discuss this kind of the